Okay, so our unit plan was on personal identities, a second grade social studies unit plan. So ours was based on a second grade classroom. And in this group, it's Hillary Robbins, Kayla Lyons, Katie Hegengruber, Taylor Green, Ali DePari, and Jessica Johnson. So our NCSS theme was individual development and identity. Our unit overview, this unit will focus on the idea of personal identities through lessons covering all the social studies disciplines. More specifically, students will spend time learning about how their classmates' lives are unique.
Um, our unit covers three standards. The first one, explain why the compelling question is important to the student. Describe how communities work to accomplish common tasks, establish responsibilities, fulfill roles of authority, and lastly, compare their own point of view with others' perspectives.
For our pre-assessment, we pretty much just want to have a basic overview of what identity is and means. And for the summative, we are going to have them draw body silhouettes, and they're going to pick a piece of their body that they want to connect with a discipline of social studies. And they'll make that connection and draw pictures of their connection on their silhouettes.
All right, so my lesson was the first one in the unit, and in essence, it covers constitutions. It'll start with the kids going over, like, discussing what are rules and stuff, and what are rules you have at home, just to get an idea of where the class is at in that understanding. And then after that, the class will go into discussion of what constitutions are, and they'll talk about preambles from various countries. And then they'll go more in depth on the aspects of what is a constitution, what is a preamble, articles, Bill of Rights, etc. And then once they have that understanding, they will work on a class constitution that goes through all of those things. So they'll spend various days working on each aspect. So day one will be a preamble, then they'll create articles, and then finally a Bill of Rights for that classroom. And then they will have copies of those within their social studies notebooks, and they will be hung in the classroom as well so that they're accessible. And that's essentially day one.
Alrighty, and then going on to lesson 2 would be My Legend. And the main focus for this one is that they understand what a legend is and what they want their legends to be. We also incorporated IEFA into this lesson. So at first we would read 2 books of American Indians and their legends, and then I would have the students pick out certain pieces that they thought to be false or thought to be stretching the truth a little bit, and we would have a talk about oral history and how oral history is different than fiction and nonfiction, and it's kind of its own little category because there are facts within the story, but things can also be stretched. And then I would do a game of telephone in order to make this as an example. After that, students will think about their own identity, and they will be asked to go home and pick 3 artifacts that they want to represent themselves. And then they'll bring them into class the next day in a container, and no names will be on any of their items or the containers. And then the kids will get to have a gallery walk and put post-its on the back of the containers to who they think the container belongs to. And then at the very end, the students will get to present and announce whose box or container belonged to who.
Okay, the third lesson in our unit is a personal artifact exchange. This is an anthropology-based lesson. So the objective is that students will explore meaning, meaning moments, events, and people in their life, and learn about the lives of their peers. So the first thing you want to do with the class is to discuss what the word artifact means and have a group discussion about it. They'll also give them like a large piece of paper where they can write down their ideas. Um, that day, you'll have them go home and find a meaningful artifact that really represents kind of who they are. And then the next day, they're going to bring it to class. So we're going to do kind of an artifact exchange or questioning thing with the other class that we have too. So the two classes will come together, and then they'll pair up with a peer and just introduce their object and explain why it's meaningful and how it connects to them. Then we're going to go back just to our normal class, just us, and then do a group share and reflect on the experience. So the assessment, it's just a formative, easy one. So while they're sharing, just listen to what students say and make sure their answers are reflecting what it actually means to them.
All right, for the fourth lesson, we're going to do recognizing similarities and differences. So the main point of this lesson is students are going to be able to observe how they're similar and how they're different from their classmates and their peers. So you're going to start by having a class discussion about respect and how we're going to be respecting each other's differences. So no name calling. They need to treat their peers the same way they would want to be treated. That's a really important part of this lesson, is making sure that there's that level of respect with the students. So then you're going to have the class talk or look around the room and jot down some ideas about how they're different from their classmates. And then you're going to begin the discussion about how these characteristics make us who we are and how they make us unique. So then as a class, you're going to go through the characteristics on the board, and you're going to have them stand if they fit that characteristic. So some of the examples could include something like they have brown eyes, or they play a sport, or they speak another language besides English, or they have a nanny, or like they're wearing tennis shoes. Really, it's just anything that makes them different. Then you're going to have a class discussion. What did you learn about your classmates by doing this activity, and some of the things that they noticed? And then why do you think it's important to share ways that we're different from each other? And then how do our differences help us learn more about each other? They can turn and talk with a partner for those ones, and then they can discuss as a group as well. Then you're going to read The Odd Velvet by Mary Whitcomb. You're going to write the words unique, diversity, and respect on the board. And then you're going to start talking about what those words mean. And they're going to come up with their own definitions, and then we're going to write those on the board as well. For the assessment, students are going to draw a picture of themselves and point out the specific things that they think make them unique, like hobbies or food or clothes that they like to wear, or how they like to wear their hair, anything like that. Underneath their picture, they're going to write, "I am special because," and then they're going to write some of the reasons that they are special and unique, and what makes them different from everyone else.
For the fifth lesson, we'll be doing a 5 hints project. So students will choose a location that they think is their favorite in the world. This can be a state, country, town, park. It can be any location. They just have to have visited it. After that, they'll come up with 5 hints that describe their location. These must be neatly written on computer paper and then glued to construction paper. If students want, they have the option of cutting their construction paper into something that represents the location. For example, if my location was New York City, I would cut my construction paper in the shape of an apple for the Big Apple, and this would count as one of their 5 hints. After they're done with that, they will present their hints to the class, and the class has to guess the location based on the hints. And then after that, there will be a short discussion about why that's the student's favorite location. For the assessments, the students will guess based on the hints and then have a discussion. So if the student can discuss why that's their favorite place, then that's the goal.
My lesson is based on economics and identity, and essentially students will take place in participating in a classroom economy over the course of a week. They will learn how to use money by keeping track of money earned in their personal ledgers. They will also have the opportunity to buy things at the end of the week in a classroom store, depending on how much money they have obtained in their wallets and kept track of in their personal ledgers. They will also keep a journal of how money is used at home with their parents over the course of the week, kind of digging more into that identity part and how they specifically are using money. They will also create a piece of writing at the end of the week explaining how they, in particular, use money.
All right, for the review of the resources, we used very few resources because almost everything in our unit plan was thought up individually. So for things that we couldn't find resources for, we modified ideas to include chain. It was also hard to find resources that were second grade friendly and not too challenging, but not too easy as well. So these are the resources we used: Odd Velvet, AmericanBar.org, and Class Constitution.
All right, so for the reflection, we had a couple of thoughts. For the reflection on the project as a whole, we thought it was hard to find an order to put our lessons in for the unit, and that affected like our end product because it was really hard to move things around in the table when we had changed the order afterwards. So just maybe moving forward, give a little bit more time to come up with the lessons before people have to make the curriculum map, therefore allowing that flexibility and having things in the right order to start with instead of having to move them afterwards. The other thing we talked about was having more work time in class. I know it's hard to give up class time to let us work on projects like this, but when we're in groups of 5 or 6 people, that's really hard to find times for all of us to meet, especially with practicum and other things that eat up a lot of our free time. For our unit itself, the things that we talked about was it's important to make sure that the lessons don't leave specific students out based on their identity. And to emphasize that more, we talked about how it's important to let students understand that they're not being graded on their identity throughout the unit, but rather just the participation and work they do throughout the unit, because we don't want in any way for a student to feel like they are being judged on who they are as a person. So that's why we talked about it's important to emphasize individuality and personal identity as opposed to what grade are you getting. And then the last thing we had was just a tip for anybody who wants to use this. Read the lesson plans in their entirety because you're going to have to make adjustments. We kind of made general outlines on a situation where we assumed who our students were, and all 6 of us assumed different students. So these lessons are very dependent, so it's going to factor into who your students are and what they are capable of. So just keep that in mind if you decide to use this.